For an entire year, she lived inside the walls of the most powerful Alpha in the kingdom. She heard his heartbeat through the stone. She memorized the rhythm of his footsteps. She watched him from the dark, and he never once looked up. Until the night everything changed. If you love slow burn, heart-pounding werewolf stories, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Stories like this drop every week, and you do not want to miss a single one. Drop a comment and tell me, Team Celine or Team Dariel? Let's go. Chapter 1. The castle breathed. That was the first thing Celine learned on the cold, terrifying night she crawled inside it and decided to never come back out. Castles, she discovered, were not solid things. They had gaps, forgotten spaces between the inner walls and the outer face of stone, narrow corridors that the original builders left for pipes and heat and secrets. They had low tunnels that connected the kitchens to the servant quarters to the great storage vaults below. They had loose panels behind tapestries and hollow columns near the eastern chapel. To most people, a castle was a fortress. To Celine, it had become a map. She had memorized every inch of it over 12 months. The groan of the third floor's eastern beam every time rain came in from the north. The particular silence of the royal corridor at exactly midnight, when the last guard made his round and did not return for 7 minutes. The faint smell of rosemary bread that drifted from the kitchens 3 times a week, always before dawn, always from the same young baker who hummed an old song beneath his breath while he worked. As she stole from the kitchens, raw meat mostly, for her inner wolf, who could not afford to be picky, dried fruit, bread when she could grab it without leaving evidence. She was careful, always careful, to take only what would not be noticed. A missing strip of venison from a full rack, a half heel of bread from a loaf someone had already cut. She had become, in the language of the old texts her mother once read to her, a wall wolf. A ghost pressed between stone and silence. The kingdom believed Celine was dead. She had let them believe it. It was the only way to stay alive. 1 year ago, her entire family had been slaughtered in a fire that was not an accident. The Lawson estate, once one of the most respected names in the northern packs, had burned to ash in a single night. Her mother, her father, her 2 brothers, all gone. And the man responsible, Francis Rice, stood at the funeral with red eyes and a white handkerchief, telling everyone it was a tragedy. Celine had escaped by falling through the floor of the burning library into the root cellar beneath it. She had clawed her way out through 3 feet of soft earth with her hands, bleeding, choking on smoke, barely breathing. She had run, and when her legs had finally given out on the edge of the capital city, she had looked up and seen the obsidian-veined towers of the Alpha King's fortress, black stone gleaming against the night sky. And she had thought, no one would look for a dead girl inside the safest walls in the kingdom. So she had gone inside. That was 12 months ago. Tonight, she pressed her palm flat against the cold stone of the inner wall and felt it, the distant, no heavy rhythm of boots moving through the corridor below. She closed her eyes and breathed. The footsteps were wrong. Every night for a year, she had catalogued the movement patterns of every person in this castle. The king's personal guard walked in groups of 3 and always turned left at the junction near the great staircase. The kitchen staff moved in short bursts, quick and distracted. The advisors walked slowly, weighted down by their own importance. But these footsteps were none of those things. These were deliberate, unhurried, a single set, moving not in the pattern of a guard making rounds, but with the particular steadiness of someone who already knows exactly where they are going. And they were getting closer. Celine pulled her hand from the stone and pressed herself deeper into the narrow corridor, where her wolf stirred beneath her skin, not in panic. She had trained herself past panic, but in sharp, silent awareness. The footsteps stopped, right on the other side of the wall. She heard nothing for a long moment. Just silence and her own careful breathing. Then, low and even, a voice came through the stone. "I know you're there." Chapter 2. She did not move. The voice did not repeat itself. It simply waited, with an ease that was almost more frightening than shouting would have been. Celine understood, in that moment, what patience in a predator truly looked like. It was not restless. It did not pace. It simply existed, confident that time was on its side. She waited. He waited. After 4 full minutes, she counted. She heard the footsteps move away. But she did not sleep that night. 3 days later, the panel behind the kitchen's north hearth opened while she was reaching for a wedge of hard cheese on the lower shelf, and Alpha King Dariel stepped through it. He was taller in person than he appeared from behind the walls. The kitchen's amber firelight carved his face into hard angles and unexpected shadows. He wore no crown at this hour, no formal robe, just a dark tunic, linen trousers, and the look of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time. He said nothing at first. He simply looked at her. And Celine, for the first time in a year, had absolutely no wall to hide behind. She thought about running. She calculated the distance to the panel, the distance to the secondary tunnel beneath the grain storage, the likelihood that he moved faster than she did. He did. She already knew that. She had watched him train in the eastern yard often enough to know that Alpha King Dariel moved like something water couldn't catch. So she straightened. She raised her chin, and she looked back at him. "You've known," she said. It was not a question. 6 months, he answered. 6 months. She had been here 12, which meant he had spent 6 of those months knowing exactly where she was, what she was taking, when she moved, and had said nothing. Done nothing. "Why?" she asked. He crossed his arms and leaned against the stone door frame. In the orange glow of the embers, something in his expression shifted. Not soft, exactly, but less like a king and more like a person. "Because I grew up in these tunnels," he said. "My father's predecessor had dark moods and a heavy hand. These walls were the only place in the castle where I could breathe." She stared at him. He stared back. "I recognized what you were doing," he said quietly. "Surviving. You were doing it well." Celine felt something strange happen behind her ribs. Not warmth, not yet, because warmth required trust, and trust was something she could not afford. But the ice there shifted, just slightly, like a river in early spring before the surface has cracked. "You're the Lawson heir," he said. "The one they said died in the fire." "I did die in the fire," she said. "Celine Lawson died. I'm just what's left." He was quiet for a moment. What's left seems to have managed the impossible for 12 months. She didn't answer that. He pushed off the door frame and moved to the small wooden stool near the bread oven and sat down, not blocking the exit, she noticed, deliberately not blocking it. "The fire wasn't an accident," he said. "I know." "Francis Rice paid for it." She went very still. "You know that?" "I've suspected it for 8 months," he said. "I sent 2 of my best men, Liam and Tommy Smith, to the Northern District to find evidence. They've been building the case." He looked at her steadily. "I didn't know you were alive. I had no witness. Now I do." The kitchen was quiet except for the fire. Celine could hear the bread baker somewhere in the back corridor, the soft hum of his morning song drifting through the walls like something from another world. She looked at the king of all the northern Pax, sitting on a kitchen stool in the low firelight, and she said the only true thing she had left. They killed everyone I loved. I know, he said, and there was no performance in it, no practiced sympathy, just the weight of a man who understood that some losses could not be answered with words. Chapter 3. He did not ask her to trust him. He simply showed her a room. It was a small chamber on the west side of the castle, unused, with a narrow window that looked out over the stone courtyard, and a bed with a frame of dark timber. There was a wash basin, and a chest of drawers, and a door that locked from the inside. You don't have to use it, he said, standing in the doorway. But it exists. He left without waiting for her answer. She stood in the hall for a long time after he walked away. Then she went back into the walls. She came back to the room 3 days later. She stood in it for a while, not quite able to bring herself to lie down on the bed. After a year of stone floors and narrow passages, the softness of it felt like something she wasn't allowed to have yet. Like peace was a door she wasn't certain she'd earned the right to walk through. She sat on the floor instead, her back against the bed frame, and stared at the window until the sky went from grey to pink to gold. That morning, a tray appeared outside the door. Dark bread, dried fruit, and a small cut of meat, still slightly warm. She ate every bit of it. A week passed. Dariel did not summon her, did not demand anything, did not announce her presence to his court. He moved through his castle like always, conducting hearings, meeting with advisers, training with his guard in the eastern yard. The only difference was that sometimes, when she was watching from behind the walls, while he would pass a certain column and pause for just a moment, as if acknowledging something that no one else could see. She began attending the shared meals. Not formally. There were no formal meals for a woman who technically did not exist. But Dariel had taken to eating his evening meal, not in the great dining hall, but in his private study, where a table was set for two near the fireplace. He did not explain this. He simply expected her, and she came because she was hungrier for conversation than she had known until she heard his voice again. He talked about the case his men were building against Rice. She talked about what she remembered, conversations she had overheard through the walls of Rice's manor the summer before the fire, whispers about debts and land deeds, and a name she hadn't understood at the time. She understood it now, while he listened to everything. He took no notes in front of her, but the next morning, Liam and Tommy would be sent north with new information, following new threads. You were gathering intelligence for a year without knowing it, he said one evening, cutting a piece of bread and setting half of it on the edge of her plate without looking up. I was trying not to die, she said. Same result. He finally looked up, and there was something in his eyes that she hadn't seen there before. Not amusement. Not quite. Something warmer. You're extraordinary, Celine. She looked away first. Her wolf noticed things her mind tried to ignore. The way the firelight caught the planes of his face when he read. The particular quality of his silence, not cold or indifferent, but full, like a room occupied by something large and patient. That the way he never leaned too close, never pushed, gave her space with the same easy certainty with which he gave her everything else. She told herself she was grateful. She told herself gratitude was all it was. She was not fully convinced. Chapter 4. It was a Tuesday when everything broke open. She had come to his study to tell him about a memory she had recovered. A specific conversation she'd heard 2 weeks before the fire, a man named Garrett discussing payment routes with Rice, and the name of a bank in the southern city that would have records. Dariel was already at his desk when she came in, a letter in his hand, and the expression on his face was one she hadn't seen before. Not his usual controlled calm, something tighter, something held very still by effort. He filed a land claim this morning, Dariel said. Port on the Lawson estate, the ruins and the ground beneath them. Rice presented documentation to the High Council, suggesting the land defaults to him through a debt contract signed 6 months before the fire. Celine felt the world tilt sideways. There was no debt contract, she said. My father owed him nothing. I know. Dariel set the letter down. He fabricated it, which means he's stopped waiting. He's moving because something told him the investigation is getting close. He stood. He may know you're alive. She crossed the room without fully deciding to. She stopped in front of his desk, her hands pressed flat on the wood, and she looked at him across the distance between them. Then we have to move first, she said. Yes. He held her gaze. Are you ready for that? To step out of the walls? To stand in front of the High Council and say your name? The question was quiet, careful. He was asking about something much larger than tactics. She had not said her own name in 12 months. She had not introduced herself, had not claimed anything, had not allowed herself to exist in the world in any meaningful way. Being Celine Lawson meant being the last surviving member of a family someone had tried to erase. It meant making herself a target. It meant wanting things, justice, a name, a life. And wanting things was a vulnerability she hadn't been able to afford. I've been afraid, she said. She said it flatly, without apology, the way you admit a fact about the weather. I know, he said. I've been afraid this whole time. I never stopped being afraid. I know that too. She looked at him. How are you so calm about everything? Something in his face changed. Not dramatically, not with any great movement. Just a small shift, like a door opening a crack. I'm not, he said. Not about everything. His voice was very even. Not about you. She should have stepped back. She had a dozen reasons to, all of them sensible and protective and correct. Instead, she stayed where she was, hands still flat on the desk, and he came around it until there was only a small amount of space between them. His hand rose and rested gently against the side of her face, not grasping, not demanding, just present, like everything else he gave her, with patience, with steadiness, like a wall that chose to hold her up instead of keep her in. She closed her eyes. I'm here, he said quietly. Whatever you decide, however long you need. I'm here. She leaned into his hand a fraction of an inch, barely enough to be called a movement, but he felt it, and the careful distance between them dissolved by half. I decide now, she said. I'm not hiding anymore. He exhaled slowly. His forehead came to rest against hers, gentle and warm, and for a moment they simply stayed like that. Two people who had both known what it meant to look for safety in the dark, and had somehow, improbably, found it in each other instead. When she finally pulled back enough to look at him, his eyes were open and steady on hers, and what she saw in them was not a king deciding what to do with her. It was a man who had been waiting for her to be ready. Together then, he said. Together. She agreed. Chapter 5. Liam Smith was a compact, serious man with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers. There's the kind of person who could look at a pile of documents and find the one false number in 300 pages inside of an hour. His brother Tommy was quieter, broader, with the particular stillness of someone who had spent years listening before speaking. They came to the study the next morning and spread their findings across the long table near the window. It was, Celine thought, looking at it all laid out, a map of her family's murder. There were bank records from the southern city. She had led them to the right institution, and they had pulled records showing 3 payments to a contractor named Garrett over the 6 months preceding the fire. There was a property transfer document dated 4 days after the fire, filed before the smoke had fully cleared, a detail so callous it was almost stunning. There was testimony from a stable hand at Rice's Manor, who had seen Garrett arrive and leave on 2 separate occasions, both times in the company of Rice's personal secretary. There was a letter, partial, unsigned, but in handwriting that matched samples from Rice's personal correspondence. It referenced the Lawson matter and described it as resolved. Celine read the letter twice. She set it down. She looked out the window at the grey morning courtyard and let the anger come, not the wild, uncontrolled grief she had lived in for the first weeks after the fire, but something sharper, cooler, with edges. "Is this enough?" she asked. Liam looked at Dariel. Dariel looked at the table. "With your testimony added," Dariel said. "Yes. It's enough to bring a case before Justice Edwards and the High Council. And it's enough to strip him of his rank and his land claim. It's enough to ensure he answers for what he did." Tommy spoke for the first time. "It'll be public," he said quietly. "The tribunal. The whole court will see you." "Good," she said. She turned from the window and met his eyes, and then Dariel's, and then Liam's, one by one. "He burned my family to the ground because he thought no one was watching," she said. "He was wrong. Walls have ears." She picked up the partial letter and set it with the stack of evidence. "Let them watch now." That afternoon, Dariel filed the request for a formal tribunal before Justice Edwards. The hearing was set for 3 days out. He told no one else she was alive until the morning it happened. She was glad for those 3 days. She needed them. Not to hide, not anymore, but to sit with the weight of what she was about to do. To let her wolf settle into the new shape of things. To let herself grow accustomed to the idea that she was allowed to take up space in the world again. On the second night, she stood at the narrow window of her room and looked out over the courtyard. She heard his footstep in the corridor, just one. Then a pause outside her door, as if he had come to check that she was all right and was deciding whether to knock. She opened the door before he could decide. He was there, one hand slightly raised. He lowered it. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Neither could I." He leaned against the doorframe, the same easy posture from that first night in the kitchen. But something was different now in the space between them. Familiar. Warm. "Are you frightened?" She considered the question with the honesty she was slowly learning to allow herself. "Yes," she said. "But it's different from before. Before I was frightened of being seen. Now I'm frightened of what happens when it's over." She looked at her hands. "I've been surviving so long, I don't know what comes after." He was quiet for a moment. "I have some ideas about that," he said, "if you'd like to hear them." She looked up at him. "Later," he said. "After." She nodded. After. Chapter 6. She wore emerald silk. It had been his suggestion, not a command, not even really advice. He had simply had a gown delivered to her room on the morning of the tribunal, dark green with deep cuffs and a fitted bodice, the kind of garment that said, "I am here, I am not apologizing for it, and I am not moving." She had stood in front of the small mirror in her room and looked at herself for the first time in a year. She had expected to find someone broken there, someone diminished. Instead, she found a woman with shadows under her eyes and a set to her jaw that had not been there before. Something forged by the past year, tempered by darkness into something harder and more permanent than grief. She left her forearms bare. She did not hide the faint burn scars from the night of the fire. If people were going to look at her, they were going to see all of it. Dariel met her at the entrance to the great hall. He looked at her once, slowly, and what moved across his face was not performance or strategy. It was simply the truth of what he felt, quiet and certain as stone. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. And for the first time, it was completely true. The great hall was full. She had watched it from the walls many times, had seen it set for celebrations, for hearings, for the formal occasions that required the assembled court and its elaborate rituals, but she had never been inside it as herself, never walked across its dark stone floor and felt the full weight of 200 pairs of eyes turned toward her. She walked in beside Dariel, and the hall went completely silent. Francis Rice was already there, standing at the far end of the hall near the High Council's raised platform. He was a broad man with white at his temples and the self-satisfied look of someone who had never once expected consequences. He was looking at her now, and for a single second she saw something move through his expression. Not guilt. Rice was too far gone for guilt. But surprise. Raw, unfiltered shock. Good. Justice Edwards was a spare, careful woman with grey eyes and a reputation for absolute fairness. She looked at Celine with an expression that was not unkind and not sentimental, simply attentive. "The court is convened," she said. "Let the record show the presence of Celine Lawson, formally declared deceased, sole surviving heir of the Lawson lineage. We will hear her testimony." Rice recovered quickly. He always had. He straightened and turned to his advocate with the practiced ease of a man who believed his documentation was unassailable. It wasn't. Celine gave her testimony clearly. She did not rush it, did not perform grief, did not ask anyone to feel anything. She laid out the facts, as she had heard and witnessed them. Conversations overheard, dates, names, to the specific language of men who believed no one was listening. When Rice's advocate tried to challenge her, she answered each challenge without flinching. "You were in hiding," the advocate said, his tone just this side of contemptuous. "You had no direct knowledge of my client's involvement?" "On the 14th of September, Celine said, cutting through him cleanly, "your client met with a man named Garrett in his private sitting room. I was in the ventilation space above it, which connects to the outer corridor of Rice's manor. They discussed payment for a job already completed and argued about the property documentation timeline. Rice said, and I can quote directly, 'The Lawson name dies with the building.'" She paused. "I remember every word. I had nothing but time to remember." The hall was very quiet. Liam and Tommy presented the documentary evidence, the bank records, the property transfer, the partial letter, the stable hand's testimony. Rice's advocate said less and less as it accumulated. Justice Edwards reviewed everything with the unhurried attention of someone who intended to get it right. The High Council conferred in low voices for 20 minutes. When Edwards returned to her seat, she looked at Francis Rice with grey, expressionless eyes. "The evidence presented is sufficient and compelling," she said. "Francis Rice, this council finds you responsible for the deliberate destruction of the Lawson estate and the deaths of the Lawson family. Your rank is hereby stripped. Your land claim is dismissed. You will be taken into custody pending formal sentencing." She looked at Celine once more, and something very small and very human moved through her composure. "The Lawson name and its associated titles and properties are formally restored." The gavel came down. Rice was taken from the hall. Celine watched him go. She felt Dariel's hand at the small of her back, light, steady, just present. She did not lean into it or pull away from it. She simply let it be there. Chapter 7. They gave her the Lawson lands back on a Thursday. The documents were brought to the castle study and signed before Liam and Tommy as formal witnesses. Celine looked at her name on the deed, Celine Lawson, rightful heir, and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't fully realized was still held tight. She folded the document carefully and placed it in the inner pocket of her jacket, against her ribs, and went outside. The castle's eastern balcony jutted out over a wide sweep of open countryside, farmland and dark forest, and the distant ridge of the northern hills, all of it gilded in the particular amber light of a late afternoon in autumn. She had not stood in open air, truly open air, in over a year. The wind came off the ridge and hit her full in the face, cold and clean, and carrying the smell of pine and turned earth and the distant hint of rain. She stood in it and breathed. She heard him come to the doorway behind her and stop there, not approaching, giving her the moment as he always did, freely, without expectation. "Come out," she said, without turning around. He came to stand beside her at the railing. For a while they simply looked out at the countryside together, neither of them speaking, letting the silence between them be what it was, comfortable and full rather than empty. "The reconstruction of the estate will take time," he said eventually. "The northern property offices will handle the land. But the house—" "I don't want to rebuild the house," she said. "Not yet. Maybe not at all." She kept her eyes on the hills. "I'd rather keep moving forward than spend energy rebuilding what was before." He was quiet, absorbing this. "Then what do you want?" She turned and looked at him then. He was watching her with an openness she still wasn't fully used to. A man who held tremendous power and chose not to use any of it in this moment, just stood at the railing of his own castle, waiting for her to tell him what she needed. "I want the people who helped you find the evidence to be rewarded," she said. "Dr. Liam and Tommy did that for over a year without knowing whether it would come to anything. They deserve to know what it led to." "Done," he said immediately. "What else?" "I want a library," she said. "Somewhere in the castle. Somewhere with good light. My mother had one, and it burned with everything else. I want one again. The south wing has been empty since my uncle moved out 6 years ago. Good light from the east in the mornings." She nodded. "And I want to learn what I'm actually worth in the world," she said. And this one came out quieter, with a thread of vulnerability she was still learning to let herself show. "I spent a year being invisible, surviving from one night to the next. I forgot, or maybe I never knew, what I'm capable of when I'm not just trying to not be caught." He turned so he was facing her fully, his back to the countryside, and he looked at her with an expression so direct and steady, it was almost like being held. "I've watched you for 6 months," he said, "from across the walls of this castle. I've spent the last weeks watching you across a dinner table and a study and a courtroom." He paused. "I have a very good idea of what you're capable of. I think you're going to surprise yourself." She almost smiled. "You're very confident about other people's futures." "Just yours," he said simply. The wind came again, lifting her hair, and she let it. She looked at him. Really looked, the way she had learned to look through the walls of this castle, at the reality of a thing rather than its surface. She had come into this fortress with nothing. No name, no family, no future. Just survival, stripped down to its barest elements. The stone and shadow, and one more night. And somehow in the bones of this place, between its walls, in the firelit silence of a shared study, something had been built that she hadn't planned and hadn't expected. Something that felt, remarkably, like home. "Dariel," she said. "Yes." "Thank you." She said it plainly, the way she had learned to say true things, without apology, without burying it under other words, for not turning me in when you found me, for letting me choose when I was ready. For... She stopped. For all of it. He reached out and tucked a strand of wind-blown hair back from her face, his touch easy and careful and warm. "You did the work," he said. "You kept yourself alive for a year. You carried that testimony in your mind when you had every reason to let it go. But you walked into that hall in front of everyone and you said your name." He held her gaze. "I just opened the door." She stepped closer, and he stayed where he was, steady as the castle behind them. "I kept thinking," she said, low, "that home was a thing I had lost, that it existed in a place, and the place was gone. And now?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Now I think it's more about the person you find it with," she said. His hand curved gently against her jaw, and she leaned into it this time, fully, without hesitation. And when he drew her in and held her against the warmth of him, the wind continued to move across the hills, and the amber light continued to fall across the castle stones. And somewhere in the castle below them, in the south wing with the good morning light, there was a room that would become a library. Orselene Lawson was not dead. She had never been more alive. She had lived in the walls for a year, cold and silent and invisible. But walls do not make a prison if you know all their secrets. And sometimes the darkest places lead to the deepest kind of light. And that is the end of Selene Andariel's story. If this one got to you, if you felt her grief, her fire, her slow and hard-won heart, share it with someone who loves a story that goes deep. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below, telling me your favorite moment. Was it the kitchen, the tribunal, the balcony at the end? New stories every week. Stay with me. The best ones are still coming.